second to swap the shows. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the library and to California Native Plant Society for inviting me to speak. One of the things that I've discovered in my tenure as a programs coordinator at Santa Clara Valley Audubon is that there is a natural connection between birds and native plants. And it was sort of a revelation to us that we realized how much we enjoyed working together and how much our organizations overlapped and partnered and cross-pollinated and whatnot, but it was a little startling that we hadn't realized it before. So it's been a really wonderful opportunity to partner with California Native Plant Society. And I will just fully admit that I shamefully have taken all of my, not shamefully, with permission, I have taken all of my plant pictures from Arvind Kumar, who I believe is the chapter president at the moment, the California Native Plant Society chapter president. And he has given me wonderful pictures from his garden with his blessing. And so a lot of the pictures that you'll be seeing of the plants will be from his garden and from some of the Audubon members' gardens. And then the bird photographs that I'll be using tonight, most of those come from members of Audubon, and again, they have given permission for us to use them for these presentations. So a couple of housekeeping items I want to just mention before I start. You guys probably have already noticed that there are some handouts in the back of the room. I wanted to point out there are some things up here for sale as well. So the stuff that's back there is mostly free. We're happy to have you guys take it. The things that are up here are ones that have a little bit of a higher cost associated with them, so they are for sale. I'm happy to have you look at them. And if anything says display only on it, and you really, really, really want it, just ask me, because I'm happy to negotiate as well. The other little bit of housekeeping thing is these presentations, there's always a lot to talk about, and I love talking about them, and there is hours and hours and hours of stuff that I could share with you about each bird. Obviously, we don't have that much time. So I'm going to try to go through a lot of this somewhat quickly, but I want to make sure that I'm covering all the important points. But if you're feeling like I've missed something or there's something that you want to know a little bit more about, please feel free to raise your hand. I love questions, and I'm happy to stop my little blabber and answer questions. But just realize that I am intentionally going a little bit quickly. I want to get through some of the introduction stuff first so that we can get to the birds, because that's the fun part. So the topic, or the title of this talk, is Attracting Birds to Your Garden. We're creating a bird-friendly habitat. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about tonight comes from a program that, again, is a partnership between the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and the California Native Plant Society. We have a program called the Bird Sanctuary Program, which is designed to help gardeners, homeowners, patio owners, whatever you may be, to create little pockets of sanctuary for wildlife in your backyard spaces. So that's where a lot of this information is coming from. The Bird Sanctuaries program has certain goals associated with it, and basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to combat the trend of urbanization in the sense as it draws away habitat, as it takes away habitat from native wildlife. So the Bird Sanctuary program is trying to create a mosaic of healthy space that animals can use even in our concrete desert. You think about a bird flying over, Cupertino or San Jose or Palo Alto. Yes, there are green spaces, but there's an awful lot of asphalt and an awful lot of inhospitable areas where the birds and the other animals are not going to be able to make their homes. So we're really trying to encourage any little space that we can to make it animal-friendly, wildlife-friendly. I want to just point out this little last one down here at the bottom. The conserve natural resources and save money. That's always sort of the clincher in getting people's interest, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but it is a real legitimate component of this program as well. We're not just throwing that in there to try to hook people in. It really does help you save money, and it does help conserve natural resources. So one of the things that I want to mention is when I'm talking about birds, and that's the specific topic about today's talk, it's almost a shorthand for a lot of other different types of animals as well. And we call it the gardening for the bees, the good bees. So we eat birds, butterflies, bees, bats, bugs, and everything else. So all of the things that I'm talking about that are creating this healthy habitat for the birds, kind of keep in the back of your mind that it's also creating healthy habitat for a whole host of other types of organisms. And that's a good thing, and that's what we're trying for. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But basically the idea is we want to create as much diversity in our backyard spaces as possible. It's going to make them more stable, it's going to make them more healthy, it's going to make them more inviting, it's going to make them more attractive, all of these things that are going to help us attract the animals that we want into our backyard spaces. So why do we care so much about this? Why is this such a big deal? Now obviously I like to see birds, I like to go watch birds, I like having birds come to my backyard spaces. But sometimes people need a little bit more than that to understand why we emphasize creating healthy habitat in our backyard. So one of the biggest things that we talk about when we talk about creating healthy habitat is that when we do it right and we're attracting birds and bugs and lizards and frogs and all these wonderful critters, we are creating a system of natural pest control. Somebody asked if during the talk I could talk about owls, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But they are a classic example. I can't even tell you how many phone calls every week asking me, what do I do about these rodents? How do I control them? And my answer is always the same: put up a nest box for barn owls. They are wonderful natural pest control. I was talking with a librarian earlier, and she was mentioning how she loves seeing the birds coming into our bushes and sitting on our bushes because she knows that they're eating the bugs. I had an aphid infestation in my little garden area, and it was because my natural predators had been wiped out by some herbicide and pesticide that the neighborhood had sprayed. So there was a very distinct consequence of losing those natural pest controls. Now all my plants are getting eaten by aphids because I've lost that pest control. This is in the news a lot. We talk about pollination syndromes. I'm sure you guys have heard about colony collapse disorder with the honeybees. Well, why do we care about honeybees having colony collapse disorder problems? It's because they pollinate our food. So when we lose our pollinators, we run into a lot of problems with food supply and natural ecosystems, things like that. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about is how to recreate and how to band-aid a little bit some of that pollination syndrome process. Seed dispersal. Now, a lot of times we think of seed dispersal as just the wind blowing things around. But if anybody's ever parked their car under a tree during cedar waxwing season, you know that they eat the berries and then they disperse them everywhere they have to let them go. And so that is a natural form of seed dispersal. And a lot of plants, in fact, require the passage through an animal's gut in order to be able to germinate. So we have this very, very tightly controlled and very tightly connected system where if we're shutting out our birds, and we're shutting out the other insects, and we're shutting out the other animals, our plants are going to have a hard time as well. We talked about a little bit about, this is not just a throwaway concept, but the water and energy conservation. One of the things that I'm going to be focusing on during this talk is talking about native plants. And the reason we love native plants so much is because they are adapted to this environment. We're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But they are adapted to living in drought conditions. They don't need a lot of extra water. And one of the things that we forget about is we forget about the connection between water and energy. Water use and water transportation is one of the most energy expensive activities in the Bay Area. Very few of us get our water from a well in our backyard. Most of us get it from the Sierra Nevadas. Most of us are getting it from big reservoirs. All that water has to get pumped. It has to use electricity to get purified to pump. Tremendous amounts of energy used for transporting water. So if we can reduce the amount of water that we're using, we're reducing the amount of energy we're using, we're helping to save resources and money. And then just a sense of environmental stewardship. I don't want to get into too much of a controversial issue, but just the idea that we're here, we've displaced all of the animals that were here. There were things living here before we built our houses. And so a sense of, it's a little bit of our responsibility to make sure that we're not completely pushing the wild things out of their own areas and giving them some space as well. And then finally, I don't know about you guys, but when I go to a park and it's all lawn and all I see are crows, it makes me a little sad. Like, it just doesn't do the same thing for me as when I walk through a wildflower field and there's all sorts of different birds and crickets and lizards and things chirping and moving and flashing and making all of this wonderful cacophony of sound and color. To me, that feeds directly into the soul. And so that's what we're talking about as well, is creating these little havens of emotional well-being just in our little backyard. And you're going to hear me talk about my backyard space, and I have to tell you, I have the dinkiest backyard space on the planet. I have this little patio, which is all completely paved. I live in an apartment. I'm lucky to have the backyard space. It's a completely little concrete patio, and I have just populated it with as many container plants as I possibly can. And my friends love going out there because they love to see what the birds are doing out there, what the bugs are doing out there. And they love to see the lizard doing his little push-ups on my friend's step. And, just that little bit of space that I've created brings tremendous amount of joy. So it's a wonderful opportunity to bring that sense of well-being and joy into our life, even in our small spaces. Okay. In this area, there are some very distinct threats to our bird populations. And again, keeping in mind that shorthand that when I talk about birds, I'm talking about a lot of things as well. There's all sorts of different pressures and development issues. The big ones that our birds have to deal with now is invasive species. This one I specifically said invasive plants, but I'll also talk about some invasive birds as well. And urbanization. Just as I said, we kind of are pushing all of our wild things out of our space, and we're forgetting how to interact with them, and we're forgetting the joys of interacting with them. So those are the biggest threats facing our animals and our wildlife today that we're trying to counterbalance or what's the word I'm trying to say? My brain just went blank. But that we're trying to counterbalance some of those threats. Okay, so now we want to talk about some of the nitty-gritty. How do we do this? How do we create bird-friendly spaces in our backyards? So we talk about the basics. We talk about what do animals need to survive. This is the first question I ask when I talk to preschoolers. It's the first question I ask when I talk to seniors. It's the first thing we need to think about is what are the animals needing? What do we need to create for them? It's wonderful if we want to put in, beautiful landscape features, but if that's not what the animals need, it's not going to do us any good. So the things we need to think about are the basics that we need as well: food, water, shelter, and safe habitat. And when we want to provide those, we want to make sure that we're providing them in a way that is actually appropriate and applicable to the animals we're trying to attract. So we want to make sure that they're as natural as possible. I know, again, not getting into controversial issues, but you've all gone to zoos, you've seen animals living in zoos. Those are one of the most artificial environments an animal can possibly live in. But a good zoo is still going to try to make it as natural as possible because they have learned over many, 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 many years that animals thrive when they can live in natural settings. We want to try to do things as naturally as possible. We also want to try to keep things as diverse as possible. Animals love diversity. Nature loves diversity. It's stable, it gives lots of food, it provides all the different things that animals are needing. So all of the things we're going to be talking about, keep those in mind. And then the last thing is you want to be consistent. So if you're planting for birds, you want to make sure that there's food for them throughout the year. You don't want to have little pulses of your yard just has food 2 months out of the year and then the rest of the time is completely barren. They're probably not going to come visit your yard in that case. They may kind of fly through, but it means you're going to have 10 months out of the year when nothing's visiting it. So you want to make sure that your activities are consistent. Now, that's not as hard as it sounds, and we're going to talk about how to do that. Okay, so when we talk about food, when we talk about natural sources of food, we talk about different types of food that we can apply and provide for our animals. So the first one I want to just mention, and again, I'm going to go through these quickly, but please feel free to raise your hand. Seed-producing plants are always going to be attractive to birds and other animals. anything that basically produces a flower or produces a seed head is going to be attractive. So we have some things here. We have our California buckwheat, which produces these beautiful bushy growths. They produce flowers mostly during the fall and the early summer, or late summer, early fall. But again, I have one growing in a pot, and it pretty much flowers all year round. I almost always have buckwheat flowers going on. Any of the native wildflowers, the goldfields, poppies, yarrow, any of those are going to be great seed-producing plants. Any of the native grasses, this is a pine bluegrass. You can see if you were a bird, that just looks so tasty up there. It's going to be producing wonderful seeds when it dries out in the fall. And we have a native thistle, and I want to emphasize that our cobweb thistle up here is a native thistle. Thistles in this area have sort of gone crazy. We have a lot of non-native thistles that really cause a lot of problems. And very few species really enjoy eating them. Some of the house finches and the goldfinches will eat them, but they spread, they're invasive, they're pest species. We don't want to plant those. But we do have this beautiful cobweb thistle, which the goldfinches go crazy over, the hummingbirds love it. These are some beautiful plants, and they're a little hard to find, but they're worth it if you can. I wanted to point out the yarrow because this is another one that I have sitting in a bucket. And I just have to remember to water it every once in a while. It's pretty hardy, and when I kill it, because sometimes I go away for 2 weeks, I forget about it, I start watering it and it comes right back. And so I have this wonderful yarrow. My lizard loves it. That's where he lives when he's not doing push-ups and driving my cats crazy through the window. The ladybugs love it. The bees love it. It's a very healthy, nice, lush plant. And as I said, mine's growing in a pot about this big. If you let it, it'll spread and enjoy whatever space you'll give it. But it's a wonderful plant, and a lot of animals really enjoy that. Now, one plant that I want to talk about briefly, if you have the space for planting a tree, one plant Arvind and I always love to talk about is the California live oak. The oak tree is an ecosystem unto itself. Birds and animals love to eat the acorns, but there are insects that come and live in the bark, and then birds will come eat the insects. There are things that eat the vegetation. I think we looked it up and found that there are up to 300 different species of animals that depend on the live oak. So as I said, it's kind of an ecosystem unto itself. It does take space, so it's not for everyone. Obviously in my patio, I'm not planting the live oak tree. But if you have the space and you have the time, it's a great plant, and a lot of animals will be very, very grateful that you've included that in your backyard space. It also gives shade. Now, one interesting thing about the live oak is it needs a little bit of water when it's getting established as a sapling, but then most of its life cycle, it really does not want water other than what nature provides. This is one of the biggest problems with the live oaks in the area and some of the valley oaks. They are adapted to summer dry conditions. When the ranchers come in and they started watering things because they wanted to provide fodder for the animals, and they watered it all summer long, basically they started killing off the oak trees. They can't tolerate that much moisture in the summer, and they think this is one of those things that people are still trying to investigate, but some researchers have shown that there's a fungus associated with the oak tree that during the summer when it's dry, that fungus dies back, and so it doesn't provide the fungus a foothold. When we keep watering during the summer, that fungus goes a little bit crazy, and that may be contributing to the sudden oak death that we're hearing a lot about. So these are wonderful plants. Again, very well adapted to this area. They don't need a lot of water once they're established. You just need to give them some space and a little bit of time to flourish. Okay. Some other natural food sources that are wonderful, and I have to say too that the ones that I'm mentioning here, these are kind of my favorites, and if I had to pick my top 50 plants or something, these would be it. There are lots more that I'm not going to be able to talk about today. Take advantage of some of the handouts that we provided. As I said, I'm just showing you some of my favorites and the ones that I think really highlight what California natives have to offer. So these two are our berry producing ones. The one on the left is a California toyon, and the one on the right is the coffee berry. These are both wonderful plants to provide food and shade and shelter. They are incredibly drought tolerant. These live in the chaparral, they live in the grassland areas where there's very, very little water. So if you're looking for a plant that's going to be slow growing and drought tolerant, you don't have to worry too much about it, you just kind of plant it and forget about it, these are going to be great. Now the toyon is also called Christmas berry because it starts to flower and fruit at this time of year, and the berries slowly ripen until about Christmas time when you get these bright red berries. And here's your little bit of trivia for the day. When settlers and whatnot first came to California and they came to the Los Angeles area, they found the hills around Christmas time just covered with toyon and these beautiful red berries and these serrated leaves. And that's where the name Hollywood comes from, because they thought the toyon was a type of a holly. Turns out they're not related at all, but that's where Hollywood comes from, is because of the toyon. Unfortunately, of course, we've lost a lot of the toyon because people keep chopping it down and planting non-natives. But it is a wonderful habitat plant. It's a wonderful food source. Our cedar waxwings, our robins, love them. We'll talk more about those in a minute. The coffee berry is another one that provides a lot of food, and in this picture it's still the bright red, but when the berries fully ripen they turn a deep, deep, deep chocolate color, which is where it gets its name, the coffee berry. Again, lots of birds come and love these berries, and the nice thing about them is they have sort of a sustained growing period, so they don't all just ripen all at once. They have a period over which they'll ripen, so it provides food over a longer period of time. Okay, now the one that everybody likes to talk about, of course, are the nectar-producing plants, because they love to talk about the hummingbirds. And we have a plethora of nectar-producing plants available to us as California natives. And again, I've just shown some of my favorites here. The one on the left here, this is a California fuchsia. We have a fuchsia-flowered gooseberry, and then we have a hummingbird sage. One of the common characteristics for plants that are going to be attracting hummingbirds is the shape and the color of the flower. Hummingbirds, and we'll see some of those in a minute, have very, very unique adaptations in how they're able to move and fly and get their food. So the flowers that they're attracted to tend to be very long and tubular. They don't require sitting on a branch. Hummingbirds can hover for a while to get their food. And they tend to be brightly colored, usually red or purple, sometimes yellow, but that's a signal to the hummingbirds that there's a good nectar plant here. Now, one of the things, and Arvind and I love talking about the fuchsia-flowered gooseberry, because this is, as you can see, it's a beautiful plant. It has absolutely gorgeous, amazingly shaped, colored flowers. I mean, you look at them and you just, what on earth are these things? But they're just beautiful. But they do die back. They are summer deciduous, so they do die back in the summer. And what you're left with is this big bundle of thorns and twigs. So what we always tell people is the fuchsia-flowered gooseberry is a great plant to plant around something you don't want things getting into. I.e., if you had a bird bath, for example, and you had neighborhood cats that were getting near birds, plant the gooseberry around the bird bath and then plant something else around that, and you have a natural barrier that animals aren't going to get through. The flip side of that is you want to make sure you don't plant it near the side of a path or someplace where people are going to be brushing up against. But it's a great natural defense to keeping unwanted land-based predators out of your area. And as I said, the hummingbirds absolutely love it. They don't care about the thorns. They'll come in anyway. Okay. Now, I add this natural source. Now, these obviously are not plants that you're planting. Excuse me. But I add this slide to emphasize the fact that if you want birds coming into your habitat, if you want birds coming into your backyard, they have to have things to eat. A lot of birds, and I would say the vast majority of birds depend on insects at some point in their life. Even something as small as a hummingbird needs insects during the breeding season. They have to feed those to their babies. If you have made a garden such that you've completely eliminated insects from your garden because you don't like things eating your plants or you don't want icky things in your plants, you are going to eliminate 75 to 80% of the birds that you might be attracting to your garden. They are looking for those insects. And as we mentioned earlier, they're going to help control them for you. They're going to help eat those insects that are going to become pest species otherwise. So it breaks my heart when I don't see my hummingbirds, because I know that my ant population during breeding season is going to get a little bit out of control. You know, I need more ladybugs to get my aphids under control. I need more bush tits and things like that. We'll talk more about them. But I just can't emphasize enough how important insects are to attracting birds. So it's one of those, I don't want things eating my plants. But if you do it right, you attract the birds, they're going to take care of it for you. And they'll provide you with hours of enjoyment as they swoop around trying to catch the mosquitoes and trying to catch the moths and things like that. Okay, so just a quick summary. We have seed-producing plants, fruit and berry-producing plants. We have nectar. You can produce, you want things that are really attracting insects. And you know, the thing that I'll keep repeating time and time again is the variety is the key. If all you want are seed-eating birds, then all you plant are seeds. All you're going to get is one or two types of plants, or birds rather. If you want to see the chickadees and the house finches and the titmice and the the Nuttall's woodpeckers and the bluebirds and the juncos, and you want to get all the different types of birds, well, you're going to have a variety of food available for them. Just like us, when we go to a buffet, everybody doesn't eat the pizza. Some people are eating the fried chicken, some people are eating the hamburgers, some people are eating the salad. We need a variety, so do the birds. And as I mentioned before, even some birds that we think of typically as unique or set to one type of food, during different times of the year, specifically during the breeding season, their food needs become more diverse because they're having to find a lot more food and they're having to bring it to their young. Okay, so I want to digress just really quickly because I want to make sure everybody knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about native plants. I keep saying these are great California native plants. These are wonderful native plants. What on earth am I talking about when I'm talking about that? In general, a native plant is any plant that grows in a specific region. And you can have locally native, you can have statewide native, so there's different areas of nativeness. But it's basically that anything that occurred before disturbance by humans. So typically when I'm talking about native plants, I'm talking about plants that occurred here before the European settlers came with their livestock and their gardens and whatnot. So that's one. And why do we care so much about native plants? Well, one, because they're water-wise. They're adapted to this habitat. They're adapted to drought conditions. Anybody who's lived in California for more than a few years knows that we are almost always in a constant state of drought. Last couple of years were a little bit of an exception, but anybody that was here 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, sometimes our droughts are really, really long. I think we had one that lasted 7 years. So we're in a desert area, we're in a drought area, we're in an area where water only comes really for a few months out of the year. Water is a precious, precious resource. Our California natives, ones that are adapted to this habitat, they know how to use that water pretty intelligently. And, you know, again, I use the example of my funny little potted plants. I've got kooky plants growing all over the place. Even in those potted plants, which of necessity you do have to give a little bit more water to, they are so resilient. I have killed every other kind of plant I've tried to grow because I have the worst track record of remembering to water things. But my native plants do pretty well. If I forget for a couple of weeks and I come back and give them a little bit of water, they're doing pretty well. So they are adapted. They have ways of getting their own water. They have really deep tap roots that can find really deep underground water. They have very small leaves that allows them to prevent loss of water through evaporation. They're incredibly adapted to our area. Most of them look pretty healthy with just a little bit of supplemental watering. They don't need a lot and they're going to grow like crazy because, again, that's what they're adapted to do. And as we talked about with the oak trees and whatnot, some of them actually don't like summer watering. They are so adapted to drought conditions that if you water them in the summer, you'll actually kill them. Woolly blue curls, which I have a picture of, is one of the classic examples. I cannot tell you how many woolly blue curls I have killed because I just can't believe that if I leave it alone all summer, it's going to be fine. And I'll always be like, well, I'll just give it a little bit of water, and then I kill it. And I'm like, oh, okay, one of these years I'm going to learn not to do that. They really don't want water, and they are perfectly happy. They die back a little bit, they grow up again, they're perfectly happy as long as we don't touch them and mess them up. So, however, I will say one thing, all young plants, whether they're native or not, do need some water to get established. Usually when young plants are growing, they have seeded themselves in an area of a natural seed where they're under the shade of another tree, so that again, they've adapted to dealing with that need of early watering when they're first getting established. Then once they're established, they're usually pretty good with the limited water. Another reason that we really, really like our California native plants is because of these coevolution that the plants and the animals have undergone through thousands of years. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the specific birds, but the idea is certain birds are attracted to certain plants. So if you want hummingbirds, you need to plant plants that have a certain shape, have a certain color. If you want bumblebees and butterflies, you need to plant plants that have a certain odor, things like that, because they know that that's a signal to them that that means that there's good food available for them. So we talked about the hummingbirds. Bees like the flatter ones. We always talk about, the purples and the blues. Those are what the bees are going for. Moths are looking for very aromatic flowers. Think of the night blooming jasmine, stuff like that. No, that's not a native plant, but we have native plants that imitate or are similar to that. They have the white flowers that are very aromatic that come out at night, things like that. The yucca, some of the native yuccas are a good example of that. Bats. Now, we don't talk too much about bats in urban settings because I think most people kind of freak out about the idea of a bat in an urban area. But you think about what bats eat. They eat moths and they eat other insects, and they're actually really nice to have around because they're going to take care of all the insects that we put the bug spray on to deal with. So if we can get the bats to come, they're a good benefit and they're a pleasant addition. Butterflies, tubular flowers. We talked a little bit about the specificity of different birds looking for different food types, and again, I'll talk more about this. I want to just kind of add, as a little side note, in an urban setting, and I get this question a lot, there's nothing wrong with doing supplemental feeding. We always recommend focusing on the plants first, getting native plants, getting the plants to be the food source. But sometimes in an urban setting, that's not possible that they used to build their nest, and so I opened up the container. And I didn't need to get very close to it. As soon as I opened it up, I stepped back and went, aha, they found a skunk. The chickadees had found a road-killed skunk and just used all their fur and lined their lovely nest. It looked very comfortable. It reminded me that chickadees don't have much of a sense of smell because they built this lovely nest. And they will use anything. I've seen them use horsehair, I've seen them use thread, yarn. You do want to be careful if you're putting stuff out there that it's not too thin. Horsehair is actually a little bit difficult for the birds. They can actually get tangled up in it. So we recommend, dog fur is great, cat fur is great, dryer lint if you're not using heavy-duty fabric softeners, things like that. That's fabulous for them. They'll pick it up. It's kind of like nature's way of recycling. They'll use a little bit of everything.
So could you say something about owls? You mentioned a nesting box.
Yeah, so barn owls are one of the species that are an obligate cavity nester. They have to build their nests in holes. And they're called barn owls because a lot of times they're associated with humans, and they're one of the few predator species that actually do okay in urban settings if they have a nesting site. So one of the best ways to attract a barn owl is to actually put up a barn owl nest box. And it can be just a simple box with a hole in it. We have specs on our website. We sell them in a nature shop. And they are amazing at keeping control of the rodent population. A breeding pair of barn owls can have up to a dozen baby owls each year, and each of those baby owls can eat 2 to 3 rodents a night. Yeah. So They are tremendously efficient, and I have to tell you, we have a barn owl that lives in our barn at the McClellan Ranch Park, and nobody believed me when I told them this, but you know, barn owls are about, maybe about this big. Usually they're pellets that they make, they regurgitate the parts that they can't eat. They're usually about that big, because you know, they're eating mice and voles and things that are small. No, the barn owl pellets that we get around here are about that big, because they're eating the pocket gophers. And they're eating the rats, and they are enjoying themselves tremendously. We have very well-fed barn owls around here. They are incredibly efficient at keeping control of the rodent populations. The flip side of that, however, though, is if we want to have healthy barn owl populations, it means we need to let them take care of the pests and not poison things. That's one of the biggest problems that we see with the barn owls in this area is they get poisoned to death because they're eating rats that have eaten rat poison, and then they themselves are having what's called a bioaccumulation, and then they end up dying. So we just remind people, let the barn owls do it. They're going to do a really good job, and if you have one or two, that's okay. Let the barn owls take care of the rodent population. Okay, so again, I'm just going to emphasize that variety is the key. Last thing I want to mention before I get into the actual birds that we have in the area is just thinking about the habitat itself, and is it a safe area? So we've talked about providing food, we've talked about providing water, providing shelter, but one of the things that we forget about is, you know, we're big. We're 5'7". Most of the birds are 2, 3, 4 inches tall. So something that may not seem like a barrier to us, like a curb or a window or a kid's soccer ball, may create huge problems for the birds that we're trying to attract. So, you know, when we talk about creating these habitats, unless you're living on a very, very quiet street, maybe put your habitat in the backyard. Maybe make that be the focus of the wildlife habitat. If you have kids, dogs, and basketballs going around, you probably don't want to put a nest box up right next to a basketball hoop or things like that. So just kind of think about some of that stuff if you're trying to create this habitat. One of the things that I think is the saddest sound in the world is to hear the birds flying and you hear this thump because they've just flown into your window. It's a fact of life. Humans like windows. I like windows. I like being able to see out. I like having light in. Birds cannot see them. They do not recognize it as a barrier. All they see is the reflection. They think their environment continues past the window. So thinking about things when you're creating a bird habitat, don't put plants right next to the window. You don't want to encourage them to be coming close to the window. Don't put feeders right next to the window. If you have the opportunity, which I realize not everybody does, but if you have the opportunity and you're starting from scratch or you're adding new windows, maybe think about putting in, I've forgotten what they're called, but instead of big giant bay window, put up the individual panels. Somebody, I just cannot think of what they're called, but my brain has shut off. Sorry about that. But windows that have individual panels that have a lot more structures breaking up the pattern, so they don't just look like the reflection of the environment. There are also things that you can put on the windows. You can put decals. One thing I brought is, this is a feather guard. It's something you just hang on the outside of the window and it just kind of dangles in front of the window. Doesn't really scare the birds off, but all it is it's a clue to them that this is not a permeable barrier. This is something solid. There's something in the way of it. They don't want to fly into the tangles of the feather guard. They don't want to get tangled up in that. So they're going to avoid it because they're going to see that there's something there. So again, just kind of keeping those things in mind when you're creating your habitat, thinking of things from the bird's perspective and what might they need to be running into. Okay, so now the good part. I want to talk about now some of the specific birds that you might get in your area and what they're going to be attracted to. So we talked about the berries, we talked about the toyon, we talked about the coffee berry. They are wonderful native food sources for birds like our cedar waxwing and our American robin. Now the cedar waxwing is going to be coming here in the winter. They usually arriving November, December-ish and leaving March, April-ish. They come in large groups. They're very, very gregarious birds. You'll see them at the tops of the trees. And during the winter, especially January, February, you step outside and you just hear beep, 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 beep. And that's the cedar waxwings talking to each other. The only thing you have to be careful of is don't park under a tree where they are all hanging out, because your car will be decorated when you come out. I have made that mistake a few times, and now I don't do that anymore. American robins, most people think of robins as worm eaters, and they are definitely worm eaters, but they love to take advantage of the winter harvested berries in this area. So they're also going to be going to the toyons and to the coffee berries. Now, incidentally, the berries that are shown in these pictures are neither coffee berry nor toyon. They are a non-native called pyrocanthus. Pyracantha? Yeah, okay. Oh, I do not like that plant at all. They make a mess. They are not providing the nutrients that the birds need. And I've heard, and these might be, urban wives' tales, but I've actually heard of the birds getting drunk from eating the pyracantha because, okay, it is true. I don't have them because I don't like them, but they actually start to ferment on the plant, and the birds will eat them, and they just, they kind of fall over. They get hit by cars. They're vulnerable to cats, things like that. So, and pyracantha is a pretty water-intensive plant. It needs a lot of water to keep it green and lush. So, if you have the choice, go with the toyon and the coffee berry. Of course, we've talked about our hummingbirds. Now, we have one species of local hummingbird that is resident, that is present all year round. That is our Anna's hummingbird. And remember how I said we like red flowers, right? You'll notice that none of the flowers in this picture are red. They will actually go after anything that has a good nectar source. But the key is that these flowers really can't be gotten into by any other bird because it would require sitting on the flower, right? Only hummingbirds can get into this nectar source, which means they pretty much have a free reign of drinking these. This is a sticky monkey flower. And then this is sort of a hummingbird sage. Now, I just have to tell you something funny about the hummingbird. So I grew up on the East Coast. Hummingbirds are very rare where I lived. In New England, you never saw them. You'd see maybe 1, 2 a year, that's it. Moved out to California, and I'd stepped outside the first place I lived, and there was, I think it was a bottle brush or something like that, and I got dive bombed by a hummingbird because I was getting in the way of its flowers. Completely baffling to me. I could not understand what was going on with the hummingbirds out here. They are incredibly territorial and incredibly aggressive. There actually have been documented cases of hummingbird battles where blood is drawn because they are fighting over their food source. They're fighting over that nectar. It is not an easy food source. It doesn't provide everything that they need, and they have to constantly be eating. So for them, it is adaptive to be territorial and aggressive. So the question I always get is, okay, I've planted some sage in my front yard, and I'm getting 2 hummingbirds, and that's it. But I like hummingbirds. I want more. I'm getting 2. I'm getting a male and a female. What do I do? So there's 2 things that you can do to attract more hummingbirds. One is plant some more hummingbird sage or some other fuchsias or things like that. Plant it where they can't see each other, because then they each think they've got their own little territory and they don't notice, and they will not fight each other off. The other strategy, which is the one I personally favor because I love sages and I love fuchsias and I love all of those wonderful red flowers, is I just plant as many red hummingbird and as many sages as I possibly can. And eventually the male hummingbird realizes, I can't defend all of these flowers, it's impossible. And he will let it go. And he will realize that there is enough food for him and whoever else visits. You often see that with the bottlebrush trees, which are not a native species but are a good hummingbird food source. You'll see lots of hummingbirds eating them because there's just no way one hummingbird could possibly defend the entire tree. They'll just give up and realize, okay, there's enough food here. So the territoriality is an adaptation to scarce resources. So give them enough resources and you're going to get more hummingbirds. And they're a lot of fun to watch because hummingbirds are one of the few birds that can actually hover in place, and they actually can fly backwards. And when they're in a pinch, they actually can fly upside down. So because of the way that their wings move, they're not moving in an up and down fashion, they actually move in a figure 8. It allows them to get into all these cool nooks and crannies that other birds can't do. So they're a lot of fun. I encourage the attraction of hummingbirds because they are just these little Napoleons of attitude in these tiny little bodies, and they're awfully fun to watch. And they have the beautiful colors, of course. Hummingbirds are known for their iridescent feathers, which are a lot of fun. Let's see, did you have a question?
Well, last picture. Was that actually an Anna's hummingbird in the upper right?
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
Yeah, it's just a very, very bright one. They got this picture when he was just full on in the sun, and the iridescence glory was shown to its full strength. Now, one thing that's interesting about hummingbirds, and I could talk about these all day, but one thing that's interesting about hummingbirds is that their iridescence actually comes from a very different mechanism than a lot of other colors on birds. It's not a pigment like other birds produce. They're actually small little lens-like structures that are caught in the feathers. And so when they move and the sun hits them, different colors come out. So that's why sometimes when the hummingbird's looking at you, it looks pink, and other times it looks purple, but sometimes it looks brown or green. It just depends on what frequency of light is being refracted by those little lens-like structures. It is one of the coolest things about hummingbirds ever. And I love telling people about that because I'm like, it's not a pigment. Anyway, that's just my science nerd coming out. So we talked about all of those wonderful seed-producing plants. Those are anything that's producing seed. Any of the native bunch grasses, the deer grass, the pine grass, the pine bluegrass. Any of the native wildflowers are going to be producing a crop of seed that is going to be wonderful for our seed eaters. The classic seed eaters, of course, are our finches, so the goldfinches and the house finches. And you'll notice they've got these short little triangular bills that are really good at picking up and crunching small little seeds. Now, the goldfinches, we have an American goldfinch, this guy, and a lesser goldfinch. They're very social. They have very, very fluid sounds. They have a beautiful, beautiful song. And they love to sit on the very tippy tops of the flowers, especially the thistles or whatnot, and they just kind of pick the seeds out on the top. So they almost look like they're floating on the tops of the flowers. You have to remember that they don't weigh very much. Their bones are riddled with air pockets. They don't have a lot of weight, so they can sit on top of them. This is one of the things that I like to do. I'm going to play you a sound from the American goldfinch. Let's see if it works. Or not. I guess not. They were having problems with the computers connecting, so I guess it's not going to talk to you. Okay, well, you're going to get me imitating it then. Sorry about that. But the finches are known for their beautiful songs. And the way that I think of them is I think of them as kind of water dripping down pebbles in a creek or something. Like you just hear and they'll be up there and they'll just sing their little hearts out. The house finches in particular, they love to sit at the very tops of the trees and just sing and sing and sing and sing and sing. And their sound is designed to carry through the bushes, and so it'll travel for very, very far distances. It's a territory warning. This is my space. It's also a mate attraction, and it's just beautiful. So it's a lot of fun to listen to. And oops, go back. Okay. We also have some birds that eat the seeds off the ground. So we have our juncos and we have our mourning doves. You've seen them. You see them walking around on the ground. They'll be picking little seeds up. The junco is probably best known for his, let's see if I can get this to work, for his call. They have this beautiful little trill. I think their speakers are not turned on. Can you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. So they have this beautiful little trill. And one of the things I love about the juncos is you'll see them, and they put so much effort into this call. They've been foraging around all day, looking for their little seeds. And when they want to sing, they plant their feet, and they throw their head back and just let loose with this trill. But you're not quite sure how that little body produces this big, huge sound, but they are just so emphatic with their sound. They're a lot of fun to watch. And you'll see them kind of doing the little dance around on the ground. You'll hear them moving around in the brush. The mourning dove, of course, one is pretty well known. And incidentally, they're called a mourning dove because of their call, because they make that whoo, whoo, whoo. It sounds like they're crying. Now, the mourning doves, if anybody knows mourning doves, they know that they really are the epitome of bird brain. They are not the smartest birds on the planet. And especially when it comes to their breeding behavior. Their nest, and I put nest in quotation marks, just kind of looked like somebody sneezed and some twigs appeared and there's their nest. They don't really put a lot of effort into it. They just sort of drop it wherever it happens to be. I've seen them nesting on the tops of fence posts, and I'm talking about a square fence post that goes like this, and they just drop some twigs and lay their eggs there. And the eggs roll off, and then they just do it again. And they will do it until they can finally get a successful nesting. So what they lack in intelligence, they make up for in persistence. And they will repeatedly nest until they get one of them. Now, they're also not known for being so smart about, this might not be the safest place to have baby birds floating around. And I love using the example of my brother who lives in San Jose. Very busy backyard. He's got 6 kids, they've got a dog, they've got neighborhood cats. They have a mourning dove pair that has nested on the top of his tool shed in the middle of a tire for years and years and years, and they have discovered that nobody can get up to that tool shed, so it's a great place. And they will nest and they will produce 4 or 5 clutches of eggs every year. And they've given up, they've tried to chase it away, and they've tried to get it to go someplace else, but it's just going to keep working on it. And so every year they produce their little clutches of mourning doves, and they, as I said, what they lack in intelligence, they make up for in persistence. So if you see what looks like somebody didn't quite finish their nest, but there's an egg in it, that's a mourning dove. Another very common bird that we get around here is the western scrub jay. So that's this blue guy over here. And remember we talked about the live oak tree being one of the most important plants that you could plant. It's an ecosystem unto itself. The western scrub jay is really designed to be an acorn eater. It's really, really good at eating acorns. It is also, however, a nest predator. So it will eat eggs, because eggs are kind of the same shape as an acorn. And they will eat, baby birds and stuff if they can. We don't consider them a pest predator, however, because their numbers tend to stay relatively small. They don't grow out of control. And one of the things that's really neat about the western scrub jays is that they actually help plant live oak trees. Because just like a squirrel does, when they want to save their acorns, they'll bury them, and then they don't always remember where they buried them. And so then they walk, they can go around planting oak trees. So they can be a little bit aggressive, and they can be a little bit of a nuisance sometimes, but they're actually pretty important to the ecosystem because they're helping to plant additional trees. These guys are the ones that everybody knows, and I apologize if I blow your ears out, but these are the ones that you hear in the mornings going, and just repeatedly back and forth, and they'll squawk at you, and they'll chase you. They are aggressive during the breeding season in particular, but again, they are important to the ecosystem as well. Okay, then we have what I call our sort of fruits and a little bit of everything. These guys will mostly come for the sweets, but they'll eat a little bit of everything too. The northern mockingbird. This is a bird that we do get year-round, but most people don't see them except during the breeding season because their breeding behavior is pretty spectacular. The northern mockingbird attracts a mate by learning sounds, which is why it's called a mockingbird. They learn sounds and songs throughout their whole life. Some adult males have been known to have 2 dozen, 3 dozen different sounds that they will produce on a regular basis. And they will imitate anything that they hear. So you can tell where a mockingbird is from, whether it's an urban mockingbird or a rural mockingbird, because the rural mockingbirds learn the sounds of other birds. So they learn the sounds of the robins, and they'll learn the sounds of the chickadees, and they'll learn the sounds of the hawks and things like that. The urban mockingbirds, however, have a different assortment of sounds that they like to learn. And we had one when I was living in an apartment complex, and it was pretty urbanized, and there were a lot of cars in there that had car alarms. And yeah, you see where I'm going on this one. The mockingbird had learned the sounds of all the car alarms because they were always going off. People were always hitting the car alarms. And that's not so bad. It's kind of funny. You hear the car alarm coming and you realize it's coming from a bird. You're like, okay, ha ha ha, that's funny. The problem is that male mockingbirds are really, really desperate to find a mate. They have testosterone pumping through their little bodies. It doesn't take much to convince them that it's time to sing. It can be a street lamp, it can be the moon, it can be a porch light. At 3 in the morning, this is the call I get is, okay, there's this bird. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a mockingbird. At 3 in the morning, the moon comes up, or the porch light goes on, or the street light is on, and they decide they have to sing. And so at 3 in the morning, we would get this mockingbird singing his car alarm songs. And he would be going, doo-doo-doo-doo, brr-brr-brr, wait, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. And we're like, what on earth is going on? And we'd go outside, and it was the bird, because he had just decided that was a great plethora of sounds. So you can tell that he was an urban mockingbird. Now, everybody asks me, well then do they go away? Do they migrate? No, it's just once the breeding season is over and the testosterone levels go back down, they can return to being a normal bird and sleeping during the night and waking up during the day. So if you hear a bird going crazy in the middle of the night during the breeding season, you will know that it is a mockingbird. And just hope that he finds a mate soon and leaves everybody in peace. The other two birds that I have up here, these are our orioles. Now, here's something interesting about the orioles. They are migrants, so they are really only here during the breeding season. We have the hooded oriole, which is this guy here, and then the Bullock's oriole. So they come up during the breeding season, and they eat the fruits and whatnot. But here's the tricky part with the orioles. They are obligate palm frond fiber nesters. They have to use palm frond fibers, so it kind of makes these strings. And they make these really intricate hanging nests. But palms are not native to California. So neither are the orioles. Over the years, as more and more palm trees have been planted and spread through Northern California, the orioles have followed the palm trees. So here's the tricky part. I love getting the orioles in spring. I love seeing them. I love seeing their color. I love hearing them. But I also know that they're not really supposed to be here. So if you want to have orioles in your area, you need to plant things that are going to be fruiting during the summer season, which of course is also not something that a lot of our native plants do. They kind of wait until the winter season. But you also have to have palm trees in the area. I do not espouse planting palm trees. They are not a native species. They have a whole host of issues associated with them. But if you are trying to get the orioles, just kind of take a peek around your neighborhood, make sure that there's at least one palm tree, and then you'll get your orioles in there. So that's your little other trivia for the day. Okay, now our insect eaters. These are sort of the bonanza of the backyard birds. These are the ones that are going to help you control those nasty aphids. They're going to help you control the potato bugs. They're going to help you control the earwigs. But these are also the ones that need a little bit of help from us. A lot of these species are the obligate cavity nesters. They have to have holes in trees in order to be able to nest. They're looking for nesting locations. They're looking for places to raise their young. So these are the ones that benefit the most from a little bit of help with nest boxes and some of our native plants because they want the insects that are going to be attracted to them. So we have our little guys. These are our titmice and our chickadees. So the titmice are the ones that are a little bit more solitary. Yeah? Sure.
So I had I'm pretty sure it was either a titmouse or a bush tit, make a nest, it's like that sock.
Yes, the dirty sock nest.
The dirty sock
Yes.
nest. And it's not in a tree.
No, so they are not, they're one of the ones that is not a cavity nester. So these little bush tits, that's the ones that she's talking about. They are about the size of my thumb, and that's about the size of them. They're very, very social, and they are the funniest thing to watch because you'll go and you'll see a bush, and you just kind of hear this, and you're like, okay, I don't see anything, I'm just hearing lots of noise. And then all of a sudden you'll see one bush tit fly off, and then 2 bush tits. And then all of a sudden you'll see this whole flock of 50 bush tits following each other. They like to be together, they like to be in big groups, but they're so tiny, as I said, they're about the size of my thumb, that they will, I don't know if you guys can see, but there's actually 4 bush tits on this penstemon. They are hanging upside down, they don't squish the flowers, they are wonderful birds to have because their tiny little beaks can get into those aphids, they can get the tiny little insects that are getting on the flowers. I'm hoping I get more bush tits coming in because I've got something eating my petunias, and these guys are going to be the ones that are going to help eat those bugs, things like that. Titmice, these guys, I don't know if you guys can see this, they have this little crest on the top of their head, and that's their little attitude marker. So that tells you how they're feeling. When they're calm, which is not often, their crest is kind of down, but as soon as they get agitated for any reason, which is pretty much everything, that little crest stands right up and they will start yelling at you because they are trying to tell you that you are in their way, and they're very territorial. That works. Now you contrast that with the, oh, it's going to keep going apparently. Contrast that with the chickadee. In the background. The only problem with this is I don't actually know how to turn them off once I've gotten them started, so they're just going to keep playing. So the oak titmouse has a lot of different sounds, it makes a lot of different noises, and the chickadee is the one that's calling its name, kind of going chickadee-dee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee, and so they'll make a lot of sounds. The chickadees are very, very social, they like to be in big groups. And the fun thing about the chickadees is they are a very curious species. They love to see what's going on. So if you go outside in your garden and you're digging something up and you're making a funny noise, the chickadee is going to be the one that's coming down and standing right on top of you going, what are you doing? What is that? What is that? They are also wonderful for birders when we go out for a walk. We do what's called a pishing sound. So we'll make a sound that goes psh, 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 that's imitating an alarm call. And I can guarantee that you'll have 20 chickadees all trying to figure out what is that noise because they're just a very curious species. And they pick the insects off of the bark of the trees and the plants. So if you have chickadees, your bark and your trees are going to be safe from grubs and other infestations because they're going to be picking it off. Talked about the bush tits again. Okay, I'm not ever supposed to say I have a favorite bird because I really don't. It's whatever bird happens to be in front of me at the time. But I love phoebes. Black phoebes were one of the very, very first birds I ever learned how to identify when I came to California. So there's a little warm place in my heart for the phoebe. But phoebes are great. They are also an insect eater, and they are eating the flying insects. So they are eating things like mosquitoes and gnats and moths and crane flies and houseflies. And they have this wonderful behavior where I'm going to have to step away from the microphone for a second so you guys can see this. So they will stand on a twig, and they will stand there and wag their tail. And I make the analogy, it's like a runner getting ready to race. You know, they're ready to go. So as soon as that insect flies in front of them, they're off. They can, boom, get it. And then they come right back to the same spot. So they have a very, very specific location that they like to hang out with. And you can watch them. We were at a park the other day, and there was a phoebe that just had decided that one park bench was its spot. And it was there for hours, and it just didn't move. That was where it was. It would go off, get an insect, come back. They will eat any flying insect that they can catch. I have seen these guys, and keeping in mind they're about, that big, I've seen them eating those giant dragonflies, the ones that are basically the same size as they are. So they will eat any insect that they can catch, but they are wonderful to have because they're just a phenomenal insect control. They do like to live near water because that's where a lot of the insects are laying their eggs and hatching. So if you want to attract the phoebes, you need to have some water or something wet on your property that is going to be attracting the insects. And they're wonderful. And they get their name because they kind of sit there and they go, dee-dee, 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 dee-dee. And it sounds like they're saying, dee-dee, dee-dee, dee-dee. Anyway, they're a wonderful bird. So that is and I always call them the tuxedo bird because they always remind me of a little gentleman going to the opera with his little top hat and tails. Okay, and you'll notice there's a lot more insect birds that I'm showing here than there are some of the other ones because, as I mentioned, most birds at some point in their life cycle must eat insects. They're a very, very important food source. Now, most of us are not going to get western bluebirds, unfortunately, in our backyard spaces. They are an animal that needs a lot of wide open space. They need meadows, they need grasslands, and only a few trees. So one of the places you do find western bluebirds is you find them a lot of times at cemeteries or golf courses or places where there's wide open spaces. One of the things that we try to do is encourage those kinds of habitats to reduce the use of pesticides. You know, everybody likes a green golf course, right? Well, that means that you're probably spraying things. That's going to be detrimental to the birds that are going to be living there. So some of the golf courses in the area have really made a concerted effort to try to reduce the amount of pesticide and herbicide and whatnot that they're spraying so that they can attract those birds. Because they've realized, you know what, golfers like looking at birds too. They enjoy seeing those as well. So the other ones are going to be a lot more common in a backyard space. And I always have to start with this one because everybody always asks me, I think you put the picture up there upside down. And I didn't. This is actually the direction that the white-breasted nuthatch likes to walk along the trees. They have a very, very, very thin pointed bill. And one of the things that they do is they go down head first down the tree and they'll pick up the insects that the chickadees couldn't catch because their bills are too short, or that the creepers that go up this way didn't catch. So they're using their resources in a very careful way that everybody gets just the perfect little niche, and they have partitioned their resources very, very carefully. So the white-breasted nuthatch, he goes down head first, which means that he's looking for places that are a little bit more hidden, that he can be a little bit more secretive in. He doesn't want to be out in the open. So he's going to be looking for trees with a good canopy, things like that. He has a funny little call. It sounds like a toy trumpet. I absolutely adore that sound. And then sometimes you'll hear them, they just kind of go, beep, 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 and they just sound like a little toy being, the button being pressed. Now the two on the right, the wrens, these are really our songsters, and I do apologize, as I said, I don't know how to turn it off once it gets started. I think it eventually will turn itself off. The wrens are our songsters. They are pretty territorial, so if you get a wren, especially in a nest box, they're not going to coexist very well with a lot of other nest box species unless you have, again, just like with hummingbirds, so many nest boxes that they can't possibly defend them. But one of the interesting things about wrens is they build what are called dummy nests. So they will take a nest box and they'll just fill it up with twigs so nobody else can use it, and then they go their other way and use theirs. So they are pretty aggressive, but they are hilarious. They are truly the bullies of the bird world in the sense that their attitude is so outsized from their size. Again, they're about this big, huge attitude, lots of noise. The Buick's wren is one that you often will hear kind of chattering at you because they think you're in their way, and they will scold quite a lot. So the wrens are known for their songs. They have very, very pretty songs. But the Buick's wren is also the one that you'll hear kind of in the bushes going, Anyway, what is that? It's because you walked too close to his bush. I mean, how dare you? So they will let you know. They will scold you, and they will inform you that life is not okay if you're standing there. And then the house wrens, let me play this down. So very, very intricate sounds. And the interesting thing is I did some work when I was in grad school on bird songs and looking at how they correlate to their habitat. And these types of sounds, with all these intricate sounds, are really designed for cutting through dense vegetation. So they're very good at passing through bushes and shrubs and things like that. So if you want to attract the house wrens, or the Buick's wrens, they're looking for things that are twiggy and sticky and things that allow them to move around, get the insects, again, they are insect eaters, and use the twigs to build their nests. Okay. Now, the last couple that I'm going to talk about, these are mostly insect eaters, but they'll eat a little bit of everything else. The towies are looking for things like brush piles. They want things on the ground. They are known for what we call the towie two-step. Okay. So this is the towie, and they use their feet, and they kind of are doing this weird little shuffle back and forth, because what they're doing is they're using their feet to dig up through the leaf litter and looking for the insects that are underneath there. So if you want to attract towies, which are wonderfully fun birds to see, and they have a lot of personality, you have to have brush piles and leaf litter. Now brush piles, and there's a wonderful handout about the brush piles, I think I brought it. Brush piles get a bad rap because everybody thinks, oh, fire danger, I can't have a brush pile, no. But one of the things that's important if you want to attract things like the towies or the quails and things like that that are on the ground that need to stay hidden, a properly constructed brush pile is actually built in exactly the opposite way of the way you would build a fire. So you think about anybody who's done camping or whatnot, right? You start with a really small tinder, and then you slowly get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Until you get the fuel that burns. A brush pile starts with the big stuff, and as it gets up, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So it provides shelter, allows airflow, but is not fire danger. So a properly constructed brush pile can be a really important resource for the birds that are going to be living in the area. Or planting low ground cover, things like ceanothus, there's dwarf ceanothus and things like that, that allow you to have ground cover without lawn. One of the things I do want to point out, just kind of as an aside, I haven't mentioned grass or lawn in any of this discussion. Does anybody know where lawns, as we think of them, come from? Where do you find really lush lawns?
I don't know, Ireland?
Ireland, yeah. England, Europe. Occasionally you'll see them in New England and area. They are not native to this area. The birds that we want to attract in this area don't like lawns. Lawns are really hard to find food unless you happen to be something like a crow. That's the other question I always get is, why are there so many crows? Because crows thrive on the non-native species. They thrive on the lawns. They thrive on the non-native trees. They thrive on dumpsters and roadkill. And they become a problem. They are technically a native species, but they become a problem because they're so out of proportion in their population. And the thing that controls them is great horned owls. Problem with that is great horned owls don't like urban areas. They want nice, big, deep, old-growth trees. They want lots of rodents. They don't want cities and urban settings. So we've created this cycle where by planting all of these wonderful lawns that produce all these grubs that the crows love, and we've pushed out all the owls, we now have this pest species that creates a lot of damage to a lot of other species. So I was very intentionally not talking about lawns. It's something that becomes a big problem. I want to just mention a couple woodpecker species. Woodpeckers get a really bad rap in this area. That's the other one I get called on is, there's this woodpecker. It's drilling holes in my house. Obviously nobody wants a woodpecker drilling a hole in the side of their house. The problem is they're usually talking about this guy, the acorn woodpecker. The acorn woodpecker's behavior has adapted to the fact that there are a plethora of acorns available and usually lots of dead trees available. So one of the things that they do is, first of all, they live in colonies. They're a very big group and they're a very social bird. And one of the things that they do is they have a great food storage program set up for themselves. So they will drill holes into a tree or a telephone pole or the side of a house, whatever happens to be handy, and they will stuff those holes filled with acorns. Now, for a long time, people thought they were just using them as food storage and that they would eat the acorns later and they would save it for, winter. But what they've actually discovered is they are eating the acorns, but they're also letting some of them rot. And as the acorns rot, they attract insects. So they're basically farming for the insects, or fishing, I should say, for the insects. So here's the problem. You're an acorn woodpecker colony, you've got 30 birds that you need to feed, and somebody has chopped down all the dead trees in the neighborhood. But hey, there's this great panel of dead wood up there. I guess I'll use that instead. So what we tell people and what we remind people is all they're looking for is some dead wood. So put up some posts, put up some poles, give them something else. They don't really want to drill into your house. That's not the best place for them, but that's the only dead wood they can find. So, leave a crag out for them or put up some posts or something else that they can use, and they would much rather do that than drilling into the side of this weird painted, artificial stuff. But that's all that they have left. And then the Nettles woodpecker is not a colonial species. They tend to be just one or two, and I love listening to the woodpecker sounds. And I apologize, you're going to get me doing this. So the acorn woodpecker to me always sounds like they're laughing. They're always going, yakko, 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 yakko. So they're always talking to each other, and they love to communicate to each other. So you'll hear a couple squawking at each other over here, and then that calls, and all of the other ones will come out over here, and they'll talk to each other for a little while, and then two of them will fly off, and then they'll call, and then all the other ones will go flying off. So they're a very communicative, very intelligent species. The Nettles woodpecker is a much more solitary species. They are, let me see if I can play this one. They are what are called a rattler. So you hear them making their nettles rattle. And the Nettles woodpeckers around here have that. They have a much longer, they go, it always just sounds like a very happy, cheery sound. And again, remembering that they're looking for insects. So when you hear a Nettles woodpecker, it means, great, something is eating the grubs in my trees. Something is going to be protecting my trees. They're going to eat the beetles. We're all set. Okay, now I wanted to just kind of mention a couple of other species to kind of be aware of. We do have some non-native bird species in the area. We talk a lot about non-native plants. We talk about the thistle, we talk about the eucalyptus, we talk about the pampas grass. Those are all non-native invasive plants. We don't like them very much. But there are some non-native bird species. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the bird species, which is different than the plant species, a lot of plant species got here by accident. They hitched a ride on an animal's fur, or they got blown into somebody's pack and then they traveled across the United States. Some of them were planted intentionally, but a lot of them were brought here accidentally. The starling and the European house sparrow were actually an example of, I'm not sure what to call it, hubris, idiocy, you take your pick. These were birds that were intentionally brought to the United States in the 1800s. They were brought to Central Park in New York. Somebody wanted all of the birds that were mentioned in the Shakespeare plays. So they brought over every single bird, and they brought over breeding pairs of every single bird that had been mentioned in the Shakespeare plays. Now, pretty cruel to the birds. Most of them did not survive. They could not survive a New York winter. I don't know if any of you have lived in New York. It's much colder there in the winter than it is in, let's say, England during the winter. So most of the poor birds just couldn't survive. They didn't make it. But that meant that the ones that did survive were sort of the uber birds, the super birds. These are the house sparrows and the European starlings. They have since, of course, spread across the entire North American continent. They are incredibly aggressive, they are incredibly territorial, and they are incredibly competitive with our native species. So one of the questions that I get is, well, what do I do about these? I don't want to go killing them. I don't blame you. I don't want to go killing birds. But here's the interesting thing. The European starlings, European house sparrows, really like European plants. They like the European trees. They like the lawns. So one of the best ways to keep these non-native species under control and to keep them out of your habitat is to plant California plants. They don't like them so much. It doesn't give them the food that they're looking for and the shelter that they're looking for. And so you're just giving our native species a little bit of a leg up and keeping some of the non-native species under control by planting some of our native plants. So I am just about out of time. I did want to leave a few minutes for questions if there was anything specific. I have a whole list of additional plants that I can show you, but I don't have time to do that. So if there were certain things that you had a specific question about, certain type of plant or where would be good, I'd be happy to answer that. But I did want to close there and just give you an introduction to some of the birds. Yeah?
What was the variety of sage that you mentioned?
There are more types of sage than I could possibly count. The one that I specifically mentioned was a hummingbird sage. And that is a purpley sage that is really attractive to hummingbirds. But really, any California sage is going to be a good wildlife plant. The bees love them, the butterflies love them, and I mean, I could do a whole talk on just California sages because there are more sages than I could possibly count. There's a white sage and a black sage and the hummingbird sage and butterfly sage and, there's a lot of them. But the one that I specifically had shown was a hummingbird sage. It has a beautiful purple flower that the hummingbirds really like. Yeah.
Do you have an office or something?
Thank you for reminding me to mention that. I always forget that. Yes, the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society is based in Cupertino. We're just down the street on McClellan Road. And I forget that we're actually in Cupertino, so I'm like, oh right, you guys know where I'm talking about. But yeah, we're just down McClellan Road near Deep Cliff Golf Course. We're at McClellan Ranch Park. And I do have some brochures and pamphlets and business cards and whatnot that have our address. We do have a little nature shop there as well. I'll just kind of throw that out there so my office manager doesn't kill me about forgetting to mention that, where we do sell a lot of these products there as well. And we do sell nest boxes. We have nest boxes, the small ones for the little birds. We have the big ones for kestrels and wood ducks and flickers. And we also have the big ones for the barn owls. So a whole bunch of birds that use the nest boxes. Yeah.
So do you have a website?
We do.
And then can we click on it and get the bird sounds?
We don't have the bird sounds linked to our website. So you can get a lot of bird sounds from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is where a lot of the bird songs that I borrowed have come from. They have this wonderful, it's called the Macaulay Library Sound. And I don't know if it is or not. It's called the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is the base site for that. But our website probably has a link to it somewhere, I would imagine. Yeah.
Does the Audubon app have bird calls in it? I think it might.
Yeah. I meant to bring that. I have the Audubon app on my Kindle Fire, and I've been playing around with that. And yeah, that has bird songs on it as well.
And it's only like $5.
Yeah, it's a wonderful.
A lot cheaper than the
iBird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Audubon has a new app. This is the whole new world of technology that we're all branching into, and that shows ranges, and it shows habitats, it shows natural histories, and it also provides the sound and stuff. So, yeah.
Do you have bird watching groups that go out?
Absolutely, we absolutely do. In our newsletter, we post that. We also post it on our calendar, and we do bird field trips every Saturday, Sunday, and 2 Wednesdays a month. A lot of those are designed for beginners. Some of them are for more advanced birders, and those are welcome. Those are open to anybody who would like to come. You don't have to be a member of Santa Clara Valley Audubon. They're open to the public, and they are led by some phenomenal field trip leaders. We have some really, really great resources. And the nice thing about those too is you get to go to all sorts of different open space areas. So you go everywhere from Rancho Cañada del Oro down in Morgan Hill. You go up to sometimes they go to Pinnacles, they'll go to Point Reyes, they go all over the Bay Area looking for wonderful birding spots. And we've got some really great experts that know how to find all those little tricky birds that you have to know just where to look.
I think we should close it off there because I know you have to pack up and we have to pack up out of the library. But I want to thank Toby for coming.